It's been a minute since we've talked about the Disney Disability Access Service, and there was good reason for that. Back when Disney announced that they were going to make a change, I did sit down and chat with you about those changes, but because that was prior to the change, I didn't want to really give too much of my thoughts. I didn't want to formulate any really strong opinions. Just wanted to tell you what we knew and then give Disney plenty of time to iron out any kinks and or backpedal. But some time has gone by. I've also taken some time to look into how to navigate the parks if you need special accommodations since then, and that leads me to believe that this is a good time to have this conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a shady corner of Epcot, hanging out for a second, waiting for Communicore Hall to open up so I can go in there, check it out, and maybe even grab a snack. And I thought that while I'm hanging out, we could chat about this, not only because it's a good time to chat about it, but also because I know that at least one of you asked about this, so I want to make sure that I answer that question and get the information out there, at least as far as I know it, like share my experience about this with you guys, just so that you can have my thoughts and any other information on this particular topic, because I know it's a difficult one, a complex one even, which, that being the case, if we were to go over absolutely every detail here, we'd be literally sitting here all day. So I'm going to breeze through some things in this conversation under the assumption that you already know what DAS is and you know how it works and you know that some changes have been made. That said, we are going to cover some basics, but just keep that in mind as we have this conversation. I'm trying to fit everything into a nice little package, into the tiniest of nutshells. So let's start at the beginning. DAS. Disney's Disability Access Service. This is a service, a program, if you will, depending on how you want to look at it, that Disney has had in place, not forever. The DAS system, by that name, I think became an official thing in 2013, if memory serves me right. Prior to that, there were other iterations of similar services and or programs and or procedures to make sure that guests who needed special accommodations for one reason or another could get them when visiting Walt Disney World. But they refined the process and ultimately came up with this thing called DAS. Now, I'm not going to focus on the previous iterations of this because, again, we'd be here all day, and the past is the past. But to fully understand why I, as well as other people, feel the way we do, we need to understand what we were coming from to fully wrap our head around why it's upsetting that we are where we are now. So DAS, as it was prior to this most recent change, was, again, the Disability Access Service that gave people with disabilities who made waiting in a traditional queue or in that traditional queue environment difficult accommodations that would help them better enjoy their time here at Walt Disney World. And when they said disability, they meant it. Anyone with any disability that would make the type of environment that waiting in a traditional queue a problem would be able to apply for and potentially qualify for DAS. Of course, not every single person had access to it. There was an application process, so on and so forth. But the important thing to keep in mind is the disability part. It included all disabilities, again, that made the wait in a traditional queue a problem. And I keep re-emphasizing that point because a common misconception is that this had anything to do with mobility. You know, those who are in a wheelchair ECV, those who struggle to stand in a traditional queue. DAS was not designed for those people. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't some crossover there, because yes, there was crossover there. Sometimes people who have other disabilities also struggle with mobility. So there was probably a little bit of a misunderstanding in some cases, thinking that the reason someone got DAS was because they were on an ECV or using a wheelchair. That wasn't necessarily the case. There was probably some other reason, more likely than not. But anyway, like I kind of mentioned already, in order to have access to DAS, you needed to apply, you needed to be approved, but this system wasn't perfect, especially because Disney didn't require any type of proof of disability or medical condition or whatever the case. And so, as a result, the program got abused. And I don't just say this because, you know, I'm repeating something that others have said. We know that it was abused by people, not only because Disney has come out and said this is a problem, especially with third-party tour guides. We've talked about that in the past. But you could also fairly easily find guides online about how to answer the questions, the right questions in the right way in order to qualify for DAS so that you could save money and not have to buy Genie Plus, for example. Of course, now it's Lightning Lane, times have changed, but you get the idea. Of course, Genie Plus, or a paid skip the line service, is not the reason that people started abusing this system. They were abusing it prior to this, but you know, that's a whole nother discussion. Now, like any company would, they wanted to try and find a way to rein in all of these problems, make it more difficult to abuse the system, and ultimately make it easier for those who need access to DAS to get access to DAS. And there are a lot of routes that Disney could have taken, but rather than going a route of asking for documentation, for example. I know that people have problems with that, but I'm just giving an example that would be a relatively simple solution. They instead went the route of changing the way that it worked. And they changed it in a number of ways. They changed the number of people in your party that could go with the person who qualified for DAS, limiting the number of people that can ride together, which I have a problem with that because families come in all different shapes and sizes, but we're just gonna set that one aside for the sake of time. But they also went the very controversial route of saying that DAS was not for anyone with a disability. No, the Disability Access Service, just to repeat that first rather important word, was only going to be for those who have developmental disabilities like autism or similar. Now, obviously, this was a controversial move and one that definitely wasn't received well. And I mean, it's pretty easy to see why. I mean, taking what was called the Disability Access Service and now saying that only a very specific disability has access to this service, I mean, come on. But there was more to it than that, mainly the way that it was rolled out, very limited amount of time for guests to figure out whether or not they were going to have access to DAS for this specific trip that they were taking, definitely not enough time to cancel trips, change plans, and tickets are, of course, non-refundable, so you couldn't have canceled your tickets, you know. Of course, like I said, I'm just breezing through some of this, but the thing that Disney said, the answer that they provided for those who didn't have developmental disabilities, was that there were going to be accommodations, but it was going to be a different type of accommodation. And this is where things really get confusing. And when they first rolled this out, they weren't very clear about what these accommodations were. And it turns out that the reason is because these accommodations aren't very easy to understand. They're a case-by-case basis, an attraction-by-attraction basis. But since I do have a family member who would have otherwise qualified for DAS and now doesn't, I took some time to talk to guest services and figure out what it is that they need to do if they want to enjoy an attraction and they aren't going to be able to wait in the queue. And the way they explained it to me was this. So there are 3 options for those who have disabilities who want to ride attractions and need special accommodations. The first, which is one that has always been around, is for them to go through a special entrance. This is especially going to be true for those who have mobility devices. Certain attractions here at Walt Disney World can't accommodate mobility devices like wheelchairs, ECVs, walkers, whatever the case may be. And so they have a separate entrance for guests. Pirates of the Caribbean is an example of this. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is an example of this. I think Splash Mountain, or now Tiana's Bayou Adventure, is another example of this as well. In those cases, you're not going in the traditional queue because the traditional queue cannot accommodate you. So you're going a separate route. So that's accommodation number 1, an accommodation that has always been around, at least as long as I can remember. The second option is to get a return time. Now, you don't need to apply for DAS, you don't need DAS to do this, but what you do need to do is go up to the attraction that you want to ride, talk to the cast member, and then let them know that you would like a return time because due to a disability, you won't be able to wait in that traditional queue environment. And it's up to them to decide if this is an accommodation that they will be able to give to you. Now, the way that it was explained to me is that they do not need to give you a return time. It's going to depend on your party dynamic and the attraction itself. The guest service cast member then went on to explain that this is an accommodation that you're most likely to get, the return time, if you're a solo traveler or you're someone with disabilities who is traveling with kids, or your kid has the disability, if your party cannot be separated. In that case, if you do get this accommodation, you will be given a return time and then you'll just return, very similar to if you're using Lightning Lane, or if you haven't used that system yet, similar to Genie Plus. The other option, the third accommodation, I'm definitely putting air quotes in here, is that You go up to the attraction, you let them know that you can't wait in the traditional queue, but they decide that they're not going to give you a return time because your party can easily be separated. So they're gonna have the person with a disability wait outside the attraction and the rest of the family get in the traditional queue. Then the family is responsible. Yes, this is exactly how they explained it to me. The family is responsible to get in contact with the disabled family member who could not wait in the queue, who was waiting elsewhere, and time that communication just right so that the disabled family member can enter the standby queue and walk through or use their wheelchair or ECV to get through the traditional queue, scooting past everyone, so that they can meet up with the family members who have been waiting in line. What was explained to me is that there is no separate entrance. You won't be able to go through the lightning lane and meet up at the merge point, none of that. You're gonna have to weasel your way through the standby queue, which, let's just take a second and acknowledge that that's absolutely unreasonable. If you've ever been in any standby queue here at Walt Disney World, you know that while they are big enough to accommodate a wheelchair or ECV, they're not big enough to accommodate an entire line of people, a queue of people, and a wheelchair and ECV. There's no way that you're navigating through that space. I just don't know what the thought process is there. But can we also take a second to recognize that Disney hasn't really had the best track record with guests being graceful when this type of thing happens. There have been fights at Walt Disney World. There was just one last night. There have been very aggressive guests being aggressive towards other guests who cut in line like this. Like, who made this decision, you know? And that's not even taking into consideration how stressful and difficult this is going to be for that disabled family member, not only being by themselves outside the queue waiting for their family, but also trying to get in touch with their family. I can't even tell you how many queues here at Walt Disney World don't have good service. You can't make a phone call if you wanted to. I just don't understand how this is supposed to work. And honestly, I don't think that the guest service cast members do either. That's definitely not the vibe I was getting. They seem to be just as frustrated and confused by this as I was. Now look, I totally understand Disney's want to make adjustments to this system. I understand them wanting to make sure that the people who need special accommodations so that they can enjoy the parks get those special accommodations, and the people who don't, who are just trying to take advantage of it, you know, that they have a more difficult time doing that. I think that there are a long list of ways that you can do that without saying, hey, we're only going to accommodate one disability, a very specific type of disability. And honestly, from what I've heard, I don't have personal experience with this. Of course, if you do, feel free to share your experience down below. Even those who have developmental disabilities still aren't qualifying for DAS under these new rules and guidelines, which, I mean, that's just having even the people who you say are going to be accommodated feeling really left out and definitely unheard. But look, at the end of the day, the long and short of it, because I do want to wrap this up, I want to continue on with my day, and I feel like I got you all the information that you basically need. I think it's important to keep in mind, especially for those of you who maybe are watching this and you're like, why are these people complaining about this system? It's not like there was never something here before and now there is, and people want to be able to take advantage of it too. That's not what's happening. It's more along the lines of visiting a place that has always had ramps, and now they remove all the ramps and they say, well, you need to be able to go upstairs in order to come here now. I know there wasn't enough time for you to change your plans. I know you already bought your non-refundable tickets, but tough cookies. That's what's happening here. And it's very disappointing, especially for a place like Walt Disney World, which is a place that in the past I have always talked very highly of, especially when it comes to accommodations, every type of accommodation, not only people who have, you know, mobility needs, but people who have disabilities, people who have dietary needs. Disney's always been a place where everyone can come and feel welcome. And the reality is this new change to the DAS system has changed that. It's no longer that welcoming place. It's no longer a place that families who already struggle with trying to do daily things and want just a moment of magic in their life can know that they're going to be welcomed and accepted. And yeah, it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be a little bit easier because of this process, because of this service that's in place. That's not the case anymore. And it's very unfortunate. I really hope that something happens. I hope that some type of change takes place. We'll just have to wait and see. Of course, talking about it, speaking up about it is always a good choice. There are lots of different ways to do that. But one thing that I do want to wrap this up with, just because I think it's necessary, you know, if you're one of the many people who has already planned your trip and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be a disaster, I want to assure you that it doesn't have to be. It's not going to be like you were hoping it would be, okay? I'm not going to tell you that it will, but there are definitely things you can do. There are definitely still moments of joy that you can find, even in less than desirable situations. So take a minute, digest all of this information, and try and take a breath and try and find the positive, try and find the magic in your vacation. In the future, maybe you don't return to Walt Disney World. That just might be the case for you and your family. It's sad but true. But if you're going to be here already because you have no other option, your vacation is definitely going to look different, but it doesn't have to be ruined. And I'm hoping that you can keep that in mind, and I'm hoping that you can still find the silver lining here. After all, you know, you're here with your family. Try and make the best of it. But all right, that's all for now. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that this gave you some information. You got a better idea of my thoughts on this. I'm sure that there is so much more to say, so share your thoughts in a comment down below. And yeah, have a great day wherever you are. Until next time, guys. Bye.